Amidst dim candlelight, a single unicorn sat with his head bent, eyes shut. He sat alone at the edge of a still pond, his reflection dancing in the water. The pond was nestled deep within the ever-free forest, where the darkened trees with their gnarled branches surrounded all sides like silent sentinels. While most of Equestria had just shifted into spring, the Everfree was gripped by clinging bits of winter. Snow covered the ground, and there was a lingering chill in the air. The unicorn's hot breath left puffs of steam to curl and rise for a few seconds before it disappeared into the night. For a long while, the unicorn sat in utter silence, on the edge of the pond with only a few nearby candles for company. The light from the tiny, flickering flames fell upon his coat and mane, which had been dyed from its natural color to a pitch black. Even his cutie mark had been covered by the dyes, his flank appearing utterly blank. Only the quiet sounds of the forest were audible. There was the creaking of the trees, the shifting of the pond water, and the occasional buzz and chirp of insects. In all, it was a scene of tranquility, and it was just what the unicorn needed to prepare for the task of the evening. Yet as he took in another deep breath, hoofsteps began to echo across the trees. "Nexus, we are ready when you are." The black unicorn, spell Nexus, took in another deep breath, and his turquoise eyes opened as he turned to look at the pony who had appeared from behind him. "I'll be along shortly." The pony who had interrupted gave a nod before disappearing back into the forest. Nexus waited for his hoofsteps to fade into silence before lighting his horn. His magic flowed freely, and he used the mystic energy to reach to his side and levitate a number of items into the air. Then he looked skyward, fixing his gaze on the moon. "Our queen, guide me this night, for it is beneath this full moon that our efforts will come to fruition." Nexus spoke the words slowly, with a voice that carried the tone of a pony well practiced in preaching, whose words could inspire loyalty and devotion. It was a voice that had drawn great minds and strong bodies to the cause. Though at the moment, Nexus spoke only to himself as he lowered his head and touched his hoof to his chest. "Let me be merely a vessel for your will, and strength until the deed is done." The levitating items drew closer to him and began to circle slowly. There was a cape, midnight blue in color, with white stars all across its surface that billowed as it moved through the air. Along with the cape were pieces of armor, all comprised of a grayish-purple metal. There were horseshoes, a neck brace, and lastly a chest plate, which had a turquoise crescent moon set into its center. "Let me bear your mane," Nexus spoke as he drew the cape over his back. "Both powerful and beautiful, a depiction of the endless sky. Let me stand in your uniform." He continued as the armor began to secure itself to his body. "In the armor that pays tribute to your image and greatness, let me be your agent this night, for it is you that I serve above all others." The final piece of armor levitated towards Nexus's chest, a helmet made of the same metal as the chest plate. The unicorn guided the helm carefully, bringing it down on his horn until it fit snugly onto his head. "May your power be with me, for tonight you shall breathe and taste the cool air night for yourself. You shall look upon the world with your own eyes, and no longer will you be forced to share a body with a weak foal as you have in the past. Tonight, you shall be your own mare, never again to be threatened by the elements of harmony." Nexus rose from his hooves and looked at his reflection in the pond. He now appeared to be the ultimate doppelganger of his mistress, and, like an eager acolyte, he was ready to bear witness to her power and knowledge. Though the efforts of him and his group, they would see their queen rise again. Yet it was only he that was allowed to look so much like the queen, to lead the spell that was about to be cast. It was his place of honor, one no pony would steal from him. "Tonight, Nightmare Moon, your followers shall grant you a life of your own, and the tyrants of the sun and moon shall fall." Mentally prepared, Nexus turned from the pool and began to walk into the forest. He followed a trail that connected to a nearby clearing, which came quickly into view. The clearing was occupied by several unicorns, Pegasus, and earth ponies who were moving back and forth across the place in a constant method of checking their work. The ground had been cleared of snow, though a few piles were left dotted about the surface. On both the exposed ground and the piles of snow there were wooden bowls filled with oil-soaked powders. Paint had been employed to draw arcane lines of powder, and cloaked Pegasi worked in the air above to push clouds together, hiding the clearing from prying, skybound eyes. All the ponies Nexus saw wore the black cloak of the Order, except for 3 who stood giving orders: a pair of Pegasi and an earth pony. They, like Nexus, wore the honored armor, though he alone wore the flowing Starfield cape and helmet. Only he had the honor of wearing those vestments. "How close are we, Nightwind?" Nexus asked as he approached the trio. "Cloud cover is almost complete, and the Pegasi only need a few more minutes to get to their bowls," the dark purple Pegasus answered, staring back at Nexus with her turquoise eyes. Such eyes were the sign of the Order, a blessing that granted not just their Majesty's regal turquoise eye color, but also enlightenment. "Good," Nexus said before turning to the earth pony. "Stonewall, do you have the items?" "They have not left my sight since our departure from Canterlot, Nexus," the earth pony replied, motioning to the bowl that was currently resting on his back. "And Greygale, is our special guest awake?" "Oh yeah, she just woke up," the gray Pegasus answered. "And boy, is she scared." "That's because you told her Stormwind would snap her horn off if she tried to escape," Nightwind snipped. Greygale shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly. "Hey, it kept her from trying anything." "She couldn't try anything even if she wanted to. She's got an anti-magic brace on her neck." "You've done well," Nexus spoke, stopping the argument before it could go any further. "But now we must all take our places. Stonewall, take the sacred items to the center of the ritual. Greygale, Nightwind, prepare your torches and head to the sky." The 3 nodded, moving to their assigned tasks while Nexus turned his attention to one side of the clearing. There, lying on the ground, was a mare who had her hooves hog-tied with rope and a cloth bag over her head. Treading carefully, Nexus moved between the wooden bowls and approached the hog-tied pony. Her violet coat was dirty from lying on the ground, and her dark purple mane was a rough mess. The sight of her like that made Nexus smile, and, once he was close enough, he used his magic to remove the bag on her head to reveal her terrified eyes. "I'm so happy that you were able to join us this evening, Miss Sparkle." "Who are you? What are you going to do with me?" Twilight asked in a panicked squeak, just barely managing to find her voice. She struggled at the ropes around her legs and tried to use her magic to escape. However, not only had she been physically bound, but the metal brace secured around her neck kept her from using her magic. Nexus laughed a little to himself, and used his magic to pick Twilight up off the ground. "Inquisitive, though I should expect no less from Celestia's star pupil," he said with a smug superiority. He then turned and began walking towards the center of the clearing, as Twilight floated behind him. Ahead of him, the earth pony Stonewall had set up a metal pedestal, upon which he had placed the wooden bowl from his back. "What we have planned for you, Twilight Sparkle, is very simple. As to who we are, well, consider us simply the loyal servants of Equestria's true queen, Her Regal Majesty, Nightmare Moon." "Are you crazy?" Twilight asked as she was twisted around in Nexus's magic, continuing to try and free herself. "Nightmare Moon is gone. How can you serve someone who is gone?" "It is much easier than you think, Miss Sparkle. I will, however, not spoil the surprise. For the moment, all you need to know is that your contribution is appreciated." At that, Nexus replaced the bag on Twilight's head. He secured it tightly before placing a sound-dampening spell across the fabric, which muffled Twilight's continued protests. Leaving Twilight floating and thrashing in the air, Nexus walked over to the metal pedestal. He examined the contents of the wooden bowl, set upon the tall, narrow metal table. His eyes gleamed with anticipation. Inside the bowl were curled shreds of what looked like paper. They were black in color, with big turquoise crescent moon adorning the largest of the pieces. Nexus then turned his attention to a dagger resting beside the pool. Looking at it, he picked it up with his magic. The blade was fine, sharp, and clean. It had never been used, although Nexus intended to change that. He turned back towards Twilight, who was still twisting, flailing, and shouting out muffled protests. He drew closer, and after lowering Twilight to the ground, Nexus proceeded to give the mare a swift kick in the stomach. The kick quickly made Twilight stop her flailing. She hung limply, trying to catch her breath that had been knocked out of her lungs as Nexus moved in with the dagger. He drew the blade across the back part of Twilight's leg, leaving a very shallow wound. It was no worse than a paper cut, but Twilight still screamed. She screamed from both the pain and also the fear for her own life. Nexus, however, showed no interest in harming Twilight further. He instead focused on the wound he had created. It had begun to weep blood, and Nexus set the dagger against it. He gathered several drops of blood on the blade, and then placed it into the bowl with Nightmare Moon's remains. "Yes. Steal the life of the blood of the bearer of the element of magic. Let it give you strength, so that you may shred the rest of your blood with your hooves." Nexus whispered to the shreds, as if in a prayer. He then levitated Twilight back to the edge of the clearing, and dropped her unceremoniously at the base of a tree before he approached the metal pedestal. At the same time, their other cloaked ponies, as well as Stonewall, Nightwind, and Grey Gale, turned their attention to Nexus. They watched him, and they fell silent as he began to speak to them as a preacher would speak to his congregation. "Brothers and sisters, for nearly 2 years we have toiled in secrecy. We worked behind the backs of the guards and tyrant princesses, and we put our own safety at risk. Personal fortunes and countless hours have been spent to bring us to this point. But now we are ready. The spell is prepared. Tonight, we, the children of the nightmare, shall see our queen given life, blood, and form of her own." The rest of the cult ponies cheered and stomped their hooves against the ground in applause. Spell Nexus smiled, and he took in their joy for just a moment before he continued to speak. "Once our queen and Luna were one and the same, but the elements of harmony could not destroy what our queen was. No, that power could only peel her away from the weak foal Lona. It could trap her essence in these precious shreds. It was a horrible fate, but it was because of the elements of harmony's ability to not destroy our queen completely, and that we can stand here tonight. For it is tonight that we give this essence of our queen life of its own. It is tonight that our queen's shackles to the meek Princess Luna shall forever be broken. And it is tonight that our campaign to retake Equestria begins." Nexus reared back and raised his voice to a triumphant shout. "Now, lend me your magic to dispel my brothers and sisters, for tonight our victory is at hoof. For tonight, Nightmare Moon will be reborn anew!" The cult cheered, sharing in Spell Nexus's jubilation, before quickly going about their work. The unicorns formed a circle around the clearing. Their horns glowed as the lines of paint they had drawn in the forest floor came to life with blue incandescence. At the same time, Stonewall, one of the few earth ponies at the ritual, walked around the circle, with a torch in his mouth. He lit the bowls filled with the oil-soaked powders, causing them to flare with an eerie blue light. A similar scene was occurring in the air above the ritual. There, the Pegasi cult members held more bowls of powder, keeping them aloft while Grey Gale and Nightwind flew amongst them. The 2 armored Pegasi lit each bowl with practiced efficiency before joining Stonewall at the edge of the spell, where the trio would watch as it unfolded. Spell Nexus watched this all himself, and once all the bowls were lit, he waited until the air became sufficiently saturated with magic. Then he used a spell of his own to take the fire from one of the bowls. He held the fire gingerly and carried it over the ritual center slowly so that it wouldn't die. Then, with a final pleased smile, he tossed the fire into the bowl containing the shreds of Nightmare Moon and the bloodied dagger. The shreds instantly burst into flames, and Nexus quickly retreated to the edge of the circle to join his fellow unicorns. There, they all began to twist and form the magic in the air, working it like potters with clay. They shaped the free magic, molded it, and began to force it down into the bowl that contained the shreds of Nightmare Moon. And, after a few anxious moments, Nexus saw what he had hoped for. The blood-soaked dagger started to float above the fire, cradled by the energies of the spell. The blood was drawn up from the blade and formed into a single crimson sphere. The dagger itself was then launched clear of the spell with such force that his polished blade dug deep into one of the trees surrounding the ritual. Then, with the dagger gone and the blood remaining, black smoke began to billow from the central bowl. The shreds of Nightmare Moon were starting to burn, and the smoke they released formed around the large drop of blood. The fires, smoke, and magic from the wooden bowls set around the spell were drawn in as well. Everything was swirling and orbiting the spell's focal point, being drawn in like water in a whirlpool. The drop of blood became encased in a black sphere, and that black sphere slowly began to grow. It grew in the fire and smoke and everything else, growing larger with each passing moment. "Yes, it is working, my brothers and sisters," Nexus called out. "She is beginning to take shape. Our queen shall soon be—" A loud noise rang out. Many of the cult ponies jumped a foot in the air when a single bolt of lightning raced down from the sky and struck the very center of the spell, sundering the metal podium and wrapping the drop of blood, shreds of Nightmare Moon, and the wooden bowl in crimson flames. At the same time, the cult's carefully constructed cloud cover was blown back, and a full battalion of royal guards flew down from the sky. "Freeze! You're all under arrest!" Several of the guards shouted as dozens of other golden-armored Pegasi landed in the center of the clearing. However, not a single pony froze. The cultists instead charged the guards, turning that once carefully tended clearing into a battlefield. Yet, as the battle began, Spell Nexus stood flabbergasted. He watched as the center of the spell and the precious shreds of Nightmare Moon were destroyed. All their plans had been decimated into a single surge of magical lightning. Lightning that could have come from only one source. Turning his eyes skyward, Nexus glared at the next figure that floated down through the hole in the clouds. With a single flash of her horn, the figure brushed away the cloud cover like froth from a cup of hot cocoa. "Celestia," Nexus forced out through grit teeth as he looked with his turquoise eyes at the Sun Princess. She floated down amidst the fighting, casting back any pony that dared attack her with barely any effect. And it enraged Nexus. Every fiber of his being wanted him to attack, to smite down Celestia for daring to interrupt the ritual. But he knew better. "Don't think you've won today, Celestia. You've merely delayed me at best," Nexus hissed. He then barked at any cultist nearby, calling them to him as his horn began to glow. Together with Greygale, Nightwind, and Stonewall, and a few dozen of the other cultists, Nexus cast his spell, and the group as a whole seemed to vanish into thin air. "Have you apprehended all involved?" Celestia asked. After rescuing Twilight, she had taken her student home and sent her straight to bed. Twilight resisted a bit, but after what she'd been through, she didn't take much to fall asleep. Celestia had then turned Ponyville's Golden Oaks library into a base of operations, keeping guard on her student personally while her guards brought their reports to her. "We've captured a great many," but we believe that some were able to escape using magic to disguise themselves," the guard reported. Head bowed respectively to Princess Celestia. "We believe it was an invisibility spell, and we followed the tracks into the forest. Unfortunately, the tracks eventually ended. We are currently working under the belief that the missing cultists realized their mistake and corrected the spell, so it hid their tracks as well. We are continuing to search the forest with the aid of the zebra that reported your student pony-napped." "Yes, Zecora. Please make sure that she is properly thanked for all she has done this evening. Also, please extend her an invitation to the palace, so that she may join Luna and I for dinner on an evening of her choosing." "Of course, Princess," the guard answered as he raised his head. "Though, if I may ask, what do you believe that these ponies were trying to do?" "I do not know," Celestia admitted, "though we were able to find out from the information we gathered prior to this night that it was something was going to happen. Unfortunately, Twilight had her head covered by a thick sack for most of the pony napping. She doesn't know enough for us to ascertain the group's purpose." "What about the spell?" Celestia shook her head. "The spell is not something I recognize. If it is from a book or ancient scroll, then I have not read it. But it could just as easily be a new spell, a ritual crafted for a specific purpose, though that purpose still remains to be unearthed. Make sure that the details of the spell itself remain preserved. It will need to be studied." The guard snapped to a salute. "Of course, Princess. We will gather any evidence at the scene and have it taken back to the castle until such a time as it can be examined." "Good. I have no doubt that the spell's purpose was dark, and I will not stand for my student being threatened," Celestia said, her eyebrows furrowing with determination. "I want the truth of this revealed, Captain, with all haste." "Of course, Your Majesty." The Unicorn Guard searched the area, sweeping it with their magic to try and detect anything left behind. What remained of the wooden bowls were gathered, and any unburnt powders was collected together in a single bag. Everything and anything that was not natural to the Everfree Forest was taken from the clearing, though the guards did not extend their search to the bordering trees and brushes once it became clear the ritual's radius ended at the tree line. All that was gathered and was loaded into the waiting chariot, and once the unicorns were finished, the Pegasi hitched to the chariot and took flight. They rose quickly into the sky before banking towards Canterlot. At the same time, the unicorns below began forming into a line, while the lieutenant of the squad began to relay orders. "All right, stallions. Let's go join the group searching for the forest for any of the cult members that might have escaped. Give high priority to any that appear to be unicorns. One of them may have used some kind of magic to get away, and we don't want that to happen a second time." "Sir, shouldn't some of us remain here to guard the crime scene?" One of the soldiers spoke up, a newer recruit to the Royal Guard. "No, these cultists are too careful for that," the lieutenant answered, his recruit. "If the zebra Zecora hadn't witnessed Twilight Sparkle's pony napping, we wouldn't have even known this was happening. That means that these ponies planned all this without Celestia knowing, or anyone in the guard finding out about it. And that means that they're not going backtracking when they've got a battalion of guards hot on their trail. And besides that," the lieutenant continued, "this isn't Central Park in Canterlot. The Everfree is dangerous. There are monsters here that could eat a pony twice my size in a single gulp, armor and all. This isn't a place where we want to spend any more time than necessary. But, if you want to stay here and guard the crime scene, be my guest. Just watch out for the hydras," the veteran guard concluded. He then motioned to the rest of the squad, guiding them out to the forest to join the ongoing search. One of the guard who had spoken up remained in the clearing as the others disappeared among the trees. He remained there for a minute, but the lieutenant's words got to him. He broke into a gallop, sprinting to catch up with his comrades. They left the clearing to once more succumb to the calm quiet of the Everfree Forest. Yet the magic that lingered in the air was a heavy mist began to shift, sparkling in the cool night air as it was drawn to one side of the clearing. There, hidden away by brush a few feet in the forest, a black sphere lay among the dirt. It was the same sphere which was cast away from the center of the spell by Celestia's bolt of lightning. The tiny black ball was nestled into a crook of the cold ground, and from there it drew in the lingering magic like a magnet attracting metal. It pulled in the energy, and with each ounce it absorbed, it grew larger. Then, when the sphere had doubled in size, it pulsed. And that pulse caused tiny droplets of blood to weep from the pores in the sphere's surface. It was the blood that had been harvested from the edge of the dagger only moments before, but now it was black and gooey. The life had been drained from it, and was now being discarded like trash. With each pulse, the sphere exerted more of the dead blood, forming a smear on the ground. Then, when none of the used blood remained, the sphere pulsed shifted. It became a weak but distinct pitter-patter that lived in the chest of almost every living creature. A heartbeat. All the while, the sphere continued to grow larger, continuing to draw in the magic of the clearing, continued the process begun by the spell Celestia had interrupted.